Hi guys, I know it's been a while since I've done a tutorial, but I thought I would do just a quick one up today. I have another version of this tutorial up as well, but I thought it would be nice to have kind of a voiced version. So what I'm going to show you guys today is pretty much how to change the face on a PNG base. So as you can see, I have one of my bases all set up here. Since I'm actually going to be drawing a picture with it. And this is just a basic, just one layer transparent PNG. And basically what I'm going to do is to take this face, erase it, and replace it with my own face. In this case, I'm actually going to be doing the face of my main Winx Club character, Lyra. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull up a picture of Lyra to use as reference. As you can see, I love folders. Yeah, here we go. So I normally pull up some kind of a reference picture, not only so that I make sure that I'm keeping the proper facial structure, but also that I can use it just to really quickly grab pictures. And in this case, I'm going to also pull up one more as well, since that actually doesn't have the proper face. So as you can see, this face that I'm going to be using has quite a few different changes from here. There's a slight change to the eyes. Obviously the nose is quite different and the lips are completely different. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a new layer. You always want to do everything on a brand new layer. That way, if you really make a mistake, you haven't actually ruined the picture that you're working on. And obviously this is done in Paint Tool SAI. Some of these techniques should be able to be used in other programs, but you need to have a program that uses layers. So, sorry Paint users, you're going to have to find something else. So the first thing I am actually going to do is, first off, I'm going to take down the opacity of this using the opacity slider. Otherwise it's going to be really distracting because we're about to actually draw on our new face. So just choose a random color. I really recommend anything other than black. And then you're going to just start kind of sketching in what you want your actual eyes to look like. And you can use whatever face your base already has as a guide if you want as well. Now I start with the eyes. You can start with whatever you want. If you find it's easier to start off with the lips or with the nose. And sometimes I'll kind of go back and forth as well. In this case, I'm following the guides fairly closely. Obviously, if the character has different eyes, like say if you were drawing Flourish, you would have those kind of slanted eyes. So you would have to go off the base a little bit. But it really does depend on the character. So we're just going to do the eyelashes, and in this case, because of the picture I'm going to be doing, she just has the one big thick eyelash. And then we're going to do the other eye. You want to stay fairly closely zoomed in. It's a little easier to work when you're zooming in, but make sure that you're not so zoomed in that you can't see the other eye. So you want to be able to use it basically as a reference to make sure that everything's just sort of matching up. And as you can see, I'm doing this with a tablet. You probably could do it with a mouse. But I'm not really sure how. I haven't actually worked in a mouse in ages, so. And you want to make sure both eyes are even. Or in some cases, some people prefer to make the wider eye, the one that I'm working on now, a little bit bigger, since it would be a little bit closer to the viewer. But I usually find it easy, especially if you're still getting kind of used to drawing eyes, just to do them both the same size. And if you're not sure how to draw eyes, the only thing I can really recommend is practice. I know it sounds really cliche, but it is actually true. The more you practice, the better you end up getting. So those look pretty good so far. And yes, I hide my sketch layer every so often, or my guide layer, just so I can see how it looks like without all the other lines in behind it. So next we're going to draw in the actual eyeballs. These are mostly going to be the same except that I extend them all the way down. Now for this one you want it to be fairly narrow because you're kind of viewing it at an angle. So as you can see, and make the pupil so that it's wider from there than it is here. Looks a little bit nicer than having it even all the way around. Oops, wrong one. And don't worry if this mess is fairly sketch is fairly messy, because it is just that, just a rough sketch. You're going to actually be redrawing this once you're done. So we're going to do the wider eye. Now this eye I normally prefer to keep fairly round. Because you're seeing it from directly on, and if you look at your own eyes, they do look pretty round. The actual irises, which is the colored part. Now when you do the shines, the one thing I recommend for the shines is make sure they're on the same side. For this eye you want to keep the shine on the wider side. No matter where your light source is, I find it usually just generally looks better. And make sure that whatever side you have your shine on for this eye, that you put the shine in the same eye. Otherwise, your character kind of looks a little derby-eyed. And again, because you're seeing this more head-on, you want to try and keep everything fairly round. Although some people do prefer to do more oval-shaped pupils, really all a matter of preference. But just try to keep it fairly consistent. And as you can see again, I did use the original base's eyes as sort of a reference guide for how to position everything and what sizes to use. So again, I'm just going to hide this, make sure they look fairly even. I like how those are looking so far. So the next thing is going to be the nose. Now if you take a look at Alira, she has one of those more kind of button noses, like Flora has, so we're just going to sketch that in. Now you want to make sure when you're doing your nose that the tip of the nose pretty much matches up with the line of the eye. So we're just going to do that, and then just that kind of a line there, just to give the nose a bit of extra volume to it. So, noses are pretty easy. And we'll just erase that line since we don't need it. And same thing with the lips. We're going to use the actual lips that are here as the guide. But if you've ever seen Alira, she has lips. Really, really wide, thick lips. But the thing is, the outline of the lips is actually fairly similar to this, so I usually start with this upper line, so I find it's usually fairly consistent. And for this, I actually normally turn this down even more. There is no set opacity for that, just use whatever you think is most comfortable for you. Actually, I don't know why I drew that line, because I don't actually need them for full lips. And for full lips, instead of doing the full line, it usually works better if you just do that sort of a little puffy part there. So once you're done with the sketching, you want to just make sure that you're really happy with how it turned out. Yeah. So now that you've got your new face kind of sketched up, for the moment you're going to want to hide it. And now you're going to make this big again. And now what we're going to do is actually remove this face, so that we have a nice clean head to work with. So just to be safe at this point, I normally go layer, copy, and just make a copy of the layer, and I'll hide the original one and work on the copy. So that way if you really mess up here, or if you want to have that face version to look at for reference, you have it available there without having to open up an entirely new image and fiddle around with it. So what we're going to do is basically just go in and erase everything. And on my faces, you'll notice some of them have that shadow above this eye. I normally erase even that. And basically all you do for that is just kind of take a copy of whatever the color is of the skin and just color over the eye. And I'm doing this eye first because it's really easy. There's no shading there, so you just kind of have to just go over it with the basic skin. And now she's just got one eye. Now for this eye, because it does actually cut into the shading, you want to be a little bit more careful with it. And because it does extend outside of the eye. So normally what I'll do first is I'll start off by erasing anything that's outside of the actual face. And for this one I actually do use the eraser. And you want to take your time for this and make sure that it really does sort of line up. It kind of has that natural progression from the lines of the skin through the eye. There we go. So now we've got everything there. So now I'm going to add in this line here. Now to make it easier for this one, actually, at this point I'll normally go over here and put a check mark in the preserve opacity. Basically what that means is that you can't accidentally draw over here. You can only draw where there's already color, so it makes it a little bit easier. You're not having to worry about matching up both sides of the line. So you just kind of want to draw the line in there and make it look fairly smooth. You want to try and match the thickness of the actual line. And if it gets narrow like this, if you want to, you can even fix that. But just make it look like it's a fairly smooth transition. But as you can see, I match from here down to here. I've tried to match up the line width as much as possible. So now we just have to get rid of this part here. Oops. Now because it does have the shading, I usually find the easiest thing to do is just to color over it with the actual shading. Just because most of this area is going to end up being shaded. And after we're done drawing on the new face, you can actually come in and adjust this shading if you want. And again, I just did the same thing as I did for the other eye, except that this time I actually took a sample of the shading color for the skin. You'll have to mind my SAI, it does not like obeying me. So don't mind it if it kind of jerks around a little there. And like I said, you don't have to worry too much about where the shading should go. At the moment, I just generally color over the eye with the shading color, and we'll really give it a nice fine tuning later on. So here you can see we've got no eyes left. Nose is fairly easy, so in this case it's not shaded, so we're just going to color over it. And for the lips, we're going to follow just the same process as we did for that one eye. So we're just going to go through and erase the parts that stick out. Color over the actual line art area. And again, we'll just keep that open. Whoops. I'm actually going to redo that because I think I hit the wrong button. Make sure that you're actually erasing and not just coloring over with white like I think I just did. There we go. So we'll add in the line art, and again, just keep it fairly consistent. It's usually easier on the lips because there's not a whole lot of line variation there. And in this case, because it's pretty clear where the shadow should be and where the line art should be, you're going to do basically what you just did with the lines. And just sort of match up the top and the bottom of the shading. There we go, and you may need to go in and just kind of fix up that line if you colored over it a bit. And again, oh. And again, we'll just sample the normal color and just color over the rest of the lips. So there we go. So now you can see we have everything all set up. And if you want to give them different eyebrows, you can even do the same technique with the eyebrows. Just color over whatever color you think goes best. Like here, you would just follow that line of shading, just the regular skin color there. So now that we have a nice clean head to work with, we are going to add in our own face. So we're just going to hide that trace again. And this would just be like any other drawing. You're going to make a new layer. And if you want just to keep everything organized, you can even just rename that sketch. And normally, just to make sure I don't accidentally draw on this, I normally preserve the opacity on it. So that way I can't accidentally start drawing over it. I'll notice it right away because the lines won't go outside of my sketch. Now this part here, if you want, you can use the line art layer and actually use the curve tool. Or if you're using something other than SAI, you can just use your tablet and draw this in if you want. So since I'm using SAI, I'm going to use that nice little curve tool. Now for this part here, I normally use a fairly thin line, just to give me a bit of extra control over those eyelashes. So you're just going to want to draw that in. And the upper eyelashes are pretty much always going to be black, unless your character's in, a unusual transformation or something where they might have, something different colored. And I know a lot of people say they actually have trouble drawing eyes, and again, really the only thing I can say is practice. You can even just fill an entire page of paper with just lips and eyes. Usually the easiest way to do it. And obviously use references. Pretty much everything on my character, Alira, is actually from another Wink. So like she has, Aisha or Flora's lips. She's got Flora's nose. She's got Bloom's eyes. So it makes it a little bit easier to find references. And this is why I use the curve tool. You can kind of... There we go. change the pressure on it so you can kind of sharpen up those eyelashes if you want, which is kind of fun. Now the bottom lashes, some people do them black, which is perfectly fine. It's all a matter of preference, really. But I prefer to do them in a slightly darker shade than I did my skin outline. I find it's just a little bit less overpowering. This extra step I'm doing with the weight, you won't need to do that. My SAI is just being really stubborn about this. So as you can see, I just made it a nice kind of even curved line. And then this inside here, I normally go to match this. And because this line was 5 and this line was size 10, I know I need to do this at about 50. So I just kind of click and drag until that first number there shows as 50. Then usually just lead those up. And this one, I kind of go like right down. And just kind of extend it. And sharpen up that line. And then it kind of gives that look like you see on the official pictures where they have that extended eyelash. And if you're wanting another a tutorial for those that eye trick, I actually learned that from QBA016, I think his name is. So he does actually have a tutorial on doing eyes that you might find useful for that technique. And again, the same thing, we just kind of match up those bottom ones. And if you want as well for a really neat look, you can even erase this little area here so that the two lines don't match up. Again, just a matter of personal style. And at this point, it's pretty much just a matter of just, you know, pulling whatever eye colors you need from your character and just following your sketch. So, pretty basic kind of stuff at this point. Now I do not actually line the eye shines, and I'll show you why in a minute. I find it a lot more natural to actually do them myself. And we'll do the nose. And normally I use about line width 7 for this. This is on my bases though, so widths and things would probably change depending on what base you use, because anybody who's used my bases knows that they're huge. But whatever you're doing, try to fairly match up with the lines, widths of whatever else, of what the actual base has. So if your base has really thick lines, don't use really thin lines on the face. If you want, like I said, if you've kept that backup layer, you can even take a look at that and see basically what the line widths are like on that, and you can use that as a reference. And in this case, because I just accidentally made the lines the same color as her lipstick, I'm actually going to go through and change that just to make it a little bit easier for me to see when I go to ink her lips. So now that this is all lined up, if you want, you can just delete your sketch layer. So obviously at this point you're not going to need it. And then you're just going to go through and color it just as normal. Now I find this easier at this point to take this line art layer, whether it was, you know, a line art layer with like this done using the curve tool in SAI, or whether you just freehand it. I normally keep the line art separate. And if you're in Paint Tool SAI, you can check this button called Selection Source. And basically what this means is if you take your magic wand and you set it to Selection Source, when you go to select something, it will only take those lines that you just drew into account. So it makes it a little bit easier for selecting them. So we're going to go through and just fill everything in with just your basic layers. And make sure that you use the increment tool a few times on your selections, just to bring them underneath your line art a little bit. Just makes everything a little bit cleaner, avoids those little gaps between your coloring and your line art. On your eyes, of course, you may have to kind of color stuff in by hand a little bit on the small areas. So yeah, pretty simple at this point, just kind of coloring everything in. As you can see, I haven't actually done the eye shines yet. I normally leave those for last. And I'll show you why in just a minute. So we'll just do the eye shine there. Normally I recommend keeping the eye shine aligned with your shading as much as you can. So for example, most of the eye shine is going to be concentrated over in this area, because most of the light would be hitting that side of the eye as opposed to this side. So we've got the basic eye done. If you want at this point, you can go through and fix anything. So like, I really don't like that eye. The great thing about these areas is, since it's all black, you really don't have to reline them if you need to make a change. So now we're going to do the eye shine. Now the trick with eye shine is to do it above your line art. And basically what we're going to do is just take your basic white, and on this eye, again, just try and keep it fairly circular. And you want it going into the pupil a little bit. And I usually do just another little line there. And again, just keep it fairly circular. And as you did with the sketch, you want to keep the shines in the same general area. But again, with this eye, you want to keep it a little bit more of an oval as opposed to a circle. With that one, it doesn't really matter as much, but I usually try and make it a little bit ovally. So as you can see, we've got the basic eyes, so now we need to do the whites of the eyes. And those ones you can't really use the selection tool for. You kind of have to do it by hand. Just because there are some open areas. So as you can see right here, I probably could use the magic wand to select it. But areas like here, there's usually a little bit of white. And here, it actually goes into the skin liner. So you're going to want to color over that skin liner a little bit. And if you want, I've noticed in Season 5 they do this a lot. And this is really the reason why I did the eye white on a separate layer. I lock the opacity and then choose kind of like a very pale kind of bluish gray. And just add some shadows to the actual eye whites. Obviously an optional step, and you didn't really see it on the official winks up until about Season 5. Although I have noticed it in the actual show there, so Now before we get to lips, as I said before, sometimes you'll find this shadow needs to be fixed, and as you can see, it does. It's way too big for this. Basically, you want this line to match up with where your actual eyelid might be in real life or on the actual character. And if you want, if you find this is a little bit confusing, you can even just get rid of it. Which is basically just painting over it with the basic color. So obviously that's just part of my personal style, adding that in. If you want to add it in, I usually recommend erasing it in the first, and then just doing just a little line that gets just kind of thinner. Basically where, if the character was wearing eyeshadow, where you would see the eyeshadow. And again, just a little line here. If you do it on one eye, make sure you do it on the other one. So you want the eyes to be both fairly consistent. So now we're going to do the lips. Lips are actually pretty easy. So basically where the actual mouth is, you're just going to do white for the teeth. And then again, just use your magic wand and select the lip liner. Make your selection just a couple of pixels bigger, and then just fill it in. Now at this stage it looks pretty flat, so normally what I do then is to take a fairly small brush, just pure white, and just add, and you want to do this on the opposite side of your shading. So because my shading is generally on the right side of the picture, I do my shine on the left side, basically where the light would hit. You want to do just a little line, and then I usually do a little bit of a dot for extra volume. And if the character has really shiny lips, you can do a little line up the top, but Lyra generally doesn't. So, and then if you want to be able to save that new face for later, you can just kind of combine all your layers. And there you go. So you can see, let me just move this over. We have gone from, a really generic kind of face to one specifically for Lyra. And again, just make sure that you're using that face as a guide. And if you've kept the backup layer, you can even just delete that. And you're all set to go. Alright, bye guys.